Welcome. Here is a brief overview of 5 ways in which we can help to reduce persistent pain with the practice of yoga, looking at asana and a little bit beyond the postures as well. And this is because it's not so much that we're thinking of pain as a structural issue as necessarily coming from the tissues of the body. We're thinking of it more as the two-way relationship between the body and the mind, because this is what all of the pain research of the last 30 plus years shows us to be the case. There's a complex whole load of interactions between body, mind, the beliefs that we have, the social system and everything. So it's called the biopsychosocial model. So first thing that we could think about and reflect on, I've got my notes here, is that the brain is always listening to the body. And what tends to happen with persistent pain, so I'm talking about long-term pain, where things have perhaps come a little bit complex. I'm not talking about, say, you've sprained your ankle and you might be better off resting the ankle and not doing too much movement on that foot at all. So setting aside injury to the tissue, which tends to have its own healing time and be quite simple, and looking at the more complex kind of perhaps back pain that's been around for a while and has been lingering, and maybe you've had the scans or there's nothing really showing up. So in those kind of situations, we tend to, in our movement pattern and our movement diet of everyday life, do the same kind of things. You might have a particular yoga practice that you enjoy, or you're a cyclist or whatever. And we tend to have, as you know, the same body movement patterns, the same kind of alignment patterns. Again, the research has shown that there's not one correct kind of form of posture or an incorrect form of posture necessarily, but more that the nervous system likes to have variability. It likes for the body to be used and moved in different ways. If you imagine that your nervous system pathways, your neural pathways, are like skiing down a mountain and there's some beautiful fresh snow, and as you ski down you can see the path of the path that you've skied down, and then the second person skiing behind you is going to follow your path, let's say, for example. This is the same way that we can think about the way that the nervous system works and the patterning of the nervous system that leads to our movements every day. And so the brain gets used to those particular movements. It stops listening so much to those because it's used to those neural pathways. But then let's say we start to bring in a different way of moving. Perhaps we introduce to our own practice or for our students a new approach to come into a posture, or a whole different asana or a whole different way of sequencing the postures that starts to feel really interesting for the brain, and the brain starts to listen to the body. Well, this gives us ways of repatterning the neural pathways. And because we know that the pain is not just in the tissues, but it's a relationship with the nervous system, it potentially gives us ways to pattern away from pain and towards more ease in the body, as well as the relationship between the body and the mind. That was my first general introductory point. Then the second thing I wanted to mention is something called the window of tolerance with reference to the nervous system. And this is basically referring to the realm, the range within which we're comfortable and adaptable with our nervous system. So we know that we have a kind of seesaw system between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So what's often called as fight-flight, or being more stimulated or more excited, and then what's often called the rest-digest response, or the calming, softening, settling, easeful kind of response of the nervous system. So we tend to pendulate between these during the day. In the morning, we're a little bit more in the sympathetic system because we've got that motivation to get up and go, hopefully. And then hopefully by the evening or after our yoga practice, we might feel a bit calmer, more down-regulated. What can happen in some situations, so where there's some mental health conditions, say we've got a bit stuck in stress or stuck with our anxiety, or we're more depressed, is that our capacity to up-regulate and then down-regulate is diminished. and we start to live within a much more limited range of nervous system states. Our window for tolerance, our capacity to cope with maybe walking outside and it feels really busy and we feel panicky, our capacity to actually then move into down-regulation might be less. So our window of tolerance has lessened. That's what that concept means. The practice of yoga asana is so well placed to increase our window of tolerance because we can alternately upregulate, move a little faster, do some sun salutations. We might want to add in things like some extra jumps or include some fast rhythm breathing, like a Kapalabhati pattern, which would be more on the upregulation side. But we also know that within the yoga practice, as we come towards the second part of our practice, we start to cool things down and calm things down, slow things down more, and maybe include a slow breathing pattern, a slow inhale and exhale, or a longer exhalation, or a long, slow hold where we're feeling into the body. I could hold a slow forward fold, and then I could lie on my back and take a gentle movement there. So things which are really calming before then, being able to perhaps drop into a more like Shavasana state, a state of ease, a state where the mind is unhooked from some of its worries and concerns. So when we realize that yoga has this capacity to up and down regulate the nervous system, we can more consciously integrate that into our yoga practice and into our yoga classes. And this can help us and our students if the nervous system has got a little bit stuck in one state or the other. Thirdly, I wanted to talk a little bit about strength and the possibility of including in our asana practice some more body weight workout kind of moves. So not classical asana necessarily, but perhaps some creative ways to move down to the ground and up to sitting, maybe even on one leg. So you might be familiar with things like a shrimp squat or pistol squat. They're not that likely to be immediately accessible, but we can work towards those kind of practices or with those kind of practices. And the reason for this is not so much simply because I think yoga should be a workout, because I'm actually a big fan of yoga being all about relaxation and reviewing on a much broader sense what this life is for. But strength work has been shown to support a sense of confidence in the body, and it's even been related to a reduction in the experience of pain when it's brought in a way that feels applicable for that person, which would mean that the amount of loading, the amount of weight bearing was gradually increased according to that person's capacity. But I think it's a really interesting one to look at, that possibility of changing up how we do the poses and including some more opportunities for strengthening. Fourthly, that whole down regulation practice that I've talked about, we might also want to have a look at integrating into any yoga practice, whether it's a more dynamic practice, some different types of movements again. So perhaps borrowing from a tradition called somatics. So there's various different families within that somatics tradition, but slow rocking movements. Posture work where we're not trying to achieve a particular shape. There's not an end goal, but more this rhythmic, almost developmental patterns of movement, more like cat-cow kind of postures where we just move quite freely, and we could even play around with cat-cow, maybe from a supine position lying down, or maybe going asymmetrically, that kind of thing, so that everybody feels confident that they can do the pose, that they're doing it right, and has that capacity to be feeling into the body and moving a little bit differently, so that it refers back to that first point of letting the brain notice something new about the body. That brings me to the last point that I wanted to make, which is really just sharing this mind-body connection with the students, talking about that, and even potentially talking about how pain works, specifically if you've set up a class around pain relief. It's a really good idea to inform a little bit about pain science without feeling all lectury, because the evidence shows that this can be really useful. And that's probably because we tend to think, oh, my body's aching and there's nothing much I can do about it, my body's frail, and this is kind of playing out and creating the pain. But once we realize that there's a relationship between the body and the mind, so the pain signal, the nociceptive signal, the signal that there might be pain, there might be harm, goes from the body to the brain. The brain puts together all of these billions of bits of information that it's getting. It's putting together how tired you are or how stressed, etc., and then relaying that back to the sensation, to the tissues of the body, and that might be where the experience of pain comes from. So simply starting to understand that pain is a complex thing. It's not to say that somebody's imagining it or that it's coming from the brain, but simply full of compassionate wisdom, understanding that there's a complex interrelationship between the body and the mind going on. This has been shown to support people to feel potentially less persistent pain, less chronic pain. And I love that this ties in so clearly with the whole of the yoga idea and yoga philosophy, that we're so much more than these bodies. We're even so much more than these minds and these brains, and that actually our consciousness, our awareness is something which extends beyond this lifetime and something which connects us all to each other. So I feel that there's ways in which to share this concept, share this idea that tally so well with what we're anyway doing in the teaching of yoga. I'm going to do a second video that puts together this talk with some more suggestions and illustrates these points more. So let me know if you would like that. I will include a link. Thank you.